Hello, my lovely rose garden, and welcome to a mysteriously pleasant book review. I am Avalon Roselin, indie author, and your supernatural investigator for the evening. Skulduggery Pleasant by Derek Landy was a patron request from CarlottaStudios. If there's a book you'd like me to read and review, consider joining my Patreon, link in description, as this helps me pay for the services I use to write and publish, and helps me get new books to read and review, especially since I've moved to a place with a much less fully stocked library system. I had been aware of Skulduggery Pleasant for a while. It was published while I was in high school and was pretty much exactly the kind of book I would have loved back then. Having read it now, yep, it sure is a book I would have loved in high school, for both good and bad reasons. Despite the series being named after him, and him clearly being the most iconic character, the main character, at least of the first book, is not Skulduggery Pleasant, but Stephanie, a precocious teenager who was close with her recently deceased uncle. Close enough, in fact, that her uncle left her a sizable inheritance after his death, and with it, a link to the world of magical mysteries that he wrote about in his books, which turn out to be far more fact than fiction. This is how Skulduggery Pleasant, a supernatural skeleton detective, enters the story to investigate the circumstances of Uncle Gordon's death and take Stephanie under his wing in the process when she refuses to go quietly back to her old life. Thus she becomes entangled in the search for the titular object, the Scepter of the Ancients. Side note, I got this book used through Thrift Books, and sometimes when you buy used, you don't get to choose the version you receive. My copy of Scepter of the Ancients has what is, in my opinion, the most boring cover variant available for this book. It's just a picture of the scepter. Skulduggery isn't even on it, aside from a silhouette by the title text. I probably won't keep this book just because of that. One of the biggest interest grabbers for this series is the detective skeleton on the cover and the tagline that he's the good guy, so kind of disappointing to get the cover that doesn't have any of that, and I won't be using that image for this review. Anyway, talking about this book is going to be interesting for me. There's certainly a lot to talk about, but I think that what defined the experience of reading this book for me was how it has really good ideas that it either hammers in too hard to the point of becoming tiresome, or doesn't flesh out quite enough to feel satisfying. For example, the writing style. There are times that the dry wit and just-so dialogue can give this book an almost Pratchett-esque voice that makes it deeply compelling. At the same time, it tends to rely heavily on this a little too much in scenes where it isn't the most appropriate, accidentally breaking tension prematurely or causing the characters to dance around an open and frank discussion of events at hand for the sake of banter. Stephanie plays the straight man of sorts to the confident strangeness of Skulduggery and others in the magical world, frequently pointing out that things are strange or convoluted, or forcing characters to stop and explain themselves. To an extent, this is good. Stephanie is the character through which the audience can learn about the world, and her comedic chemistry with Skulduggery is top-notch. However, there were times that I did feel a little frustrated with this. There comes a point where the audience, and Stephanie as a result, should really be expecting some oddness, or Stephanie would remark on something that didn't seem weird at all. The exact example I'm thinking of is a spoiler, I guess, since Stephanie treats it like a major reveal, but it really didn't seem like one at all, and that was a little dissonant while reading. Another area that I noticed this was in the world building. There is undoubtedly an interesting world at play in the shadows of Skulduggery Pleasant, but I didn't feel like it was fully explored. Since this is only the first book in a series, it is entirely possible that this will be fleshed out more in later installments. However, I do try to judge books, especially the first of a series, by their own merits and contents. Scepter of the Ancients introduces a lot of interesting history and backstory for its setting and magical characters, but does not fully flesh them out within this same volume. There's a late twist in the book that I just kind of blinked at because, well, I just didn't think it was well foreshadowed at all. To go into further detail, I will have to start talking about spoilers. I think that Skulduggery Pleasant makes for an interesting read, and as stated, high school me would have loved it. So if you enjoy young adult fantasy and would like a snarky lead pair that aren't romantically inclined toward one another, give Skulduggery Pleasant a shot. It may not be perfect, but it's still plenty good. To quote the New York Daily News, it is definitely a fast-paced, movie-ready read, despite no word of an official film release. Given that I would most liken this series to Artemis Fowl, maybe that's a blessing in disguise. If you are leaving the video now, please remember to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. I make videos about the books I read and the books I write, and your support really makes a difference for an indie author like me. If you're interested in supporting me even further, please consider buying my books or becoming a patron. You can find the links to my website, Patreon, Ko-fi, and social media accounts in the description. So, my main issues with the book are the following. 1. No satisfying conclusion to the murder of Gordon Edgley. While Stephanie and Skulduggery are able to take down the perpetrator of the murder, the who and why were so obvious without enough focus on the how that it didn't really feel like Serpine's defeat was about getting revenge for Gordon anymore, if it ever was. Gordon's death was more of a means to an end for both the villains and the heroes. If Gordon had been more involved posthumously with the investigation, such as leaving a trail of breadcrumbs to the scepter should he die due to nefarious reasons, I think that these plots would have connected much better. As it is, Gordon dies, Stephanie meets Skulduggery, Skulduggery saves her from some henchmen, and then Skulduggery pretty much says, yeah, my arch-nemesis must be responsible for this somehow, and is right. There isn't a whole lot of detective work going on for a book that is supposedly about supernatural detectives. That doesn't make it a bad story by any means. My own book, Cloudless Rain, focuses more on catching the villain than unmasking him, but there isn't enough connection between Serpine and Gordon to make it feel like that plot was truly resolved to me. I don't even remember if Serpine revealed how he killed Gordon, because the very first lines of the book set up that Gordon died very suddenly and with zero warning at all. 2, as you might have guessed from the non-spoiler section, Skulduggery Pleasant isn't the main character. Rather, he's the mentor to actual main character Stephanie, aka Valkyrie Kane. And while she does have a badass name and is a solid character, if the series is named Skulduggery Pleasant, I expect it to be primarily about him, especially given his hugely interesting backstory. He fought in a whole magic war, he resurrected himself out of sheer force of will, and has had to watch as his arch-nemesis, who killed his wife and child, walks off basically scot-free after the war. He had a wife and child at some point, apparently. There's a ton of interesting content to explore with this character, but because he is not the main protagonist, it isn't covered nearly deeply enough for my taste. This was especially striking to me when one of the other characters brings up to Stephanie that there's a chance of Skulduggery being dangerous due to his obsession with revenge against Serpine, But then nothing about Skulduggery seems all that dangerous. His choices are not overly reckless, at least in the sense of carelessly endangering Stephanie's life for his own gain. True, he doesn't exactly try to discourage Stephanie from dangerous situations, one of the aspects of their dynamic I actually like, but he also doesn't treat her callously or without concern. There is zero doubt in my mind that if there was a choice between Stephanie's safety and getting revenge, Skulduggery would keep Stephanie safe. There is also a little lacking from their relationship in regards to this as well. Like, does Skulduggery see Stephanie as the daughter he lost? A character relationship that I am admittedly a huge sucker for? Probably not. Aside from a brief mention, the fact that Skulduggery had a family isn't really brought up. I don't know. It's probably just me griping that this book wasn't written with my exact preferences in mind at this point, but I would have enjoyed something more like a serialization of supernatural mystery stories starring Skulduggery Pleasant, and finding out that this series is not that, apparently, is part of why I put it off for so long. Overall, Scepter of the Ancients is a good book. Maybe not the best introduction to a series that I could have hoped for, but a solid enough read on its own for fans of books like Artemis Fowl or Percy Jackson. It has a lot of good ideas, unfortunately a few too many to have time to completely explore, and memorable characters with some of the coolest names you'll ever read in a book, plus lots of snark and sarcastic humor. If that sounds like your thing, check it out. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Have you read Skulduggery Pleasant, specifically Book 1, Scepter of the Ancients? Do you think the rest of the series is worth reading? Do any of my issues get resolved later? Leave me a skull emoji and tell me in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and a special thank you to my patrons. If you'd like to see your name here or in the description below, please consider joining my Patreon. Your support means so much to me and allows me to continue making content. If you want to support my content in different ways, consider buying my books, donating on Ko-fi, subscribing to the channel, or even just giving this video a like and comment. Any and everything is appreciated so much. Keep growing till next time, Rose Garden!